Jeffrey Thomas Porcaro was born on April 1st, 1954, in Hartford, Connecticut. He was the eldest son of the percussionist Joe Porcaro, who himself was a famous jazz session musician. Jeffrey had two brothers, Steve and Mike, and a sister. His brothers would end up playing later in the band Toto with him. They were all raised in the San Fernando Valley area of Los Angeles, and Jeff attended Ulysses S. Grant High School. Jeff began to play drums at the age of 7, getting lessons from his father. Later, he'd study under Bob Zamiti and Richie Lepore. At the age of 17, Jeff got his first professional gig playing in Sonny and Cher's touring band. He called Jim Keltner and Jim Gordon his idols during this time period. In his 20s, he recorded on hundreds of albums. He toured with Boss Skaggs before co-founding the band Toto with his brother Steve and childhood friends Steve Lukather and David Page. Jeff would become renowned among drummers, not only because of drum patterns that he later created, but just because he was very, very particular, and I guess you would say meticulous. He was very talented, and it was incredible how at such a young age he ended up becoming boosted and being able to play with so many musicians. I believe on Discogs there's over 900 albums that he has played on. Jeff is also, at least in writing, a lot of people write about how he was so renowned for his drum pattern on the song Rosanna, the song by Toto. And this song would later go on to win a Grammy. The pattern, which is called the halftime shuffle groove, was originally created by Bernard Purdie, who called it the Purdie Shuffle. Jeff made his own version of the pattern by blending the Purdie Shuffle with the groove he'd hear in John Bonham's work with Led Zeppelin, which is mainly cited in the song Fool in the Rain. But he also kept a Bo Diddley beat on the kick drum. So Jeff had a lot of influences that I guess you would say were from the jazz era. And this is pretty prevalent and obvious, not only in his music, but and not just the music with Toto, but also, to me especially, actually, with Steely Dan. I'm really a big fan of Steely Dan. I love their music a lot. And my favorite songs that has Jeff playing on it would be Daddy Don't Live in That New York City No More. And I think that everyone has gone to the movies. Is Those are two really good examples of his drum playing. And he, just to put it very simply, Jeff was definitely jazz influenced, but he gave that rock experience to it. And I'm trying to think of some of the other songs off the top of my head that he played on. He was on Gaucho, the self-titled song from the album, you know what I mean? And of course, that one is, of course, good too. Really, to put it this way, you're hard to find a song that Jeff played on that wasn't good. And Jeff had worked with numerous artists, not just Sonny and Cher and Steely Dan, but also, of course, George Benson, Eric Clapton, Miles Davis, David Gilmour, Elton John, Don Henley, Donna Summer, Joe Walsh, Paul McCartney, and even more than that. On October 22nd, 1983, Jeff married Susan Norris, who was a TV broadcaster for KABC TV. And they had 3 sons named Christopher, Miles, and Nico. Unfortunately, on August 5th, 1992, Jeff passed away after falling ill from what was initially believed to be spraying pesticide or having sprayed pesticide in the yard of his home. There are various stories about this where he was in the yard spraying pesticide, and then another source that I had read said that he had sprayed the yard the day before, something along the lines of that, and then passed away the day after. But either way, initially people thought he had received an allergic reaction from the pesticide. The coroner actually ruled out an accident and determined that it was actually a heart attack due to occlusive coronary artery disease that was caused by atherosclerosis resulting from cocaine. In other words, hardening of the arteries as due to cocaine usage. An LA County coroner spokesman, along with some of the doctors who had treated Jeff, stated that his death was due to a heart attack caused by an allergic reaction to having inhaled the pesticide. And bandmate Steve Lukather and Jeff's own wife had stated that they believed Jeff had been suffering from a long-standing heart condition and a smoking habit, both that contributed to his death. Lukather noted that several members of Jeff's family died at a young age due to heart disease, and this is true. There are multiple articles that post that Jeff had passed away from the allergic reaction to the pesticide. For example, one from the LA Times on August 5th in 1992, and more, but none of the sources I ever found ever said what pesticide he was using. It's unknown if a brand name or scientific name were ever revealed. That was something I personally could not find. He may have possibly inhaled the spray. At least that's what the authorities thought before the autopsy. Now, initially, the paramedics were called to Jeff's home at about 6:30 p.m. that day, and witnesses stated that Jeff had complained of feeling sick while doing yard work. LA County Fire Inspector Dennis Vlach stated that Jeff was in critical condition when they arrived on the scene. There was no breathing, no pulse. He was in full cardiac arrest. Rescue workers managed to briefly revive Jeff, who was taken by helicopter to Humana Hospital West Hills. He was pronounced dead at 8:30 p.m. He had lived with his 3 kids and his wife, and who was actually the mayor pro tem of Hidden Hills during that time period. Jeff's manager, Larry Fitzgerald, said that he was doing a little yard work. The doctor believes that the pesticides somehow triggered an allergic reaction, and he suffered cardiac arrest. His wife and kids were home at the time, and Jeff had just returned from a family vacation in Florida, and the band was scheduled to begin rehearsals for a tour that was in support of their recent release, Kingdom of Desire. There are different numbers, of course, from different sources, but anywhere from 1,200 to 1,600 people attended Jeff's funeral. This includes many of the musicians that he worked with, like Don Henley, David Crosby, Eddie Van Halen, Graham Nash, Jackson Browne, and more. After his death, Jeff's family had asked that any donations be made to Grant High School, which he had attended. The Ashbury Park Press, among other sources, wrote that the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office ruled Jeff's death as having been caused by the hardening of the arteries from past cocaine usage. His brother, among other people, have rejected this, and some people reject this to this day. Mike Porcaro is quoted in one article having said, "Some public officials will say anything to get their name in the papers. Jeffrey was no angel, but he wasn't an animal either. He had a heart condition which had nothing to do with drug abuse." A couple of other sources I have posted this as the cause of death too. For example, the Atlanta Constitution had stated that Jeff had died of coronary problems linked to cocaine use, and Press of Atlantic City had written that Jeff had died from a heart attack that a coroner ruled was brought on by cocaine use. That was also according to the Rolling Stone Encyclopedia of Rock and Roll. A tribute concert was held for Jeff in December of 1992. The proceeds were to go towards an education fund for his sons. Many of Jeff's friends and former bandmates showed up to play, such as Don Henley, Michael McDonald, David Crosby, Eddie Van Halen, Boz Scaggs, Donald Fagen, and a surprise guest appearance from George Harrison. An article from the LA Times talked about the tribute and brought up the circumstances of Jeff's death. It stated that Jeff was initially thought to have had the heart attack as caused by an allergic reaction to pesticide that he was spraying in his yard. The Los Angeles County Coroner's report found no traces of pesticide, instead citing a history of cocaine use as causing hardened arteries. Small traces of cocaine were found in Jeff's system. Susan, his widow, disputed the coroner's conclusion. There was supposed to be a private autopsy done that his wife had wanted, though it may have required exhuming Jeff's body. One source states that the private autopsy could have used materials without exhuming his body, but either way, I never saw an update on this or if this second autopsy was ever done. The Morning Star posted on September 16th, 1994, stating that, on the insistence of an insurance company, a further autopsy revealed that his death was related to the hardening of the arteries, though the rest of the sentence was cut off. The Windsor Star posted on July 30th, 1998, that Jeff's death was related to the hardening of the arteries stemming from cocaine use. And yes, I know I sound like I'm just repeating myself, but this seems to be an odd debate, to put it that way. I was definitely not expecting to find just various sources stating, no, it was cocaine use, no, it was pesticides, this or that. From the time that he died, there have just been multiple articles, even internet articles, that have said, no, it was this, or no, it was that. It just goes back and forth. It just constantly does. In a 1998 article from Sunday Mercury, David Page is quoted as having said, "There was so much rubbish talked about Jeff's death. Like anyone else in the band who used it, he had stopped taking cocaine and partying by the time of his death. He was not addicted to cocaine." The article then went on to say that pathologists blamed Jeff's death on the hardening of the arteries, which they linked to years of cocaine use. On April 24th, 2000, The Guardian posted an article about musicians that met tragic ends. And interestingly, they talked about Jeff and said that one afternoon, while trying to install a barbecue in his backyard, Jeff embarked on one of his bug-killing binges. All he wanted was a pest-free lawn. But the endless onslaught of bumblebees, the whole brutal regime of pesky winged insects, finally became too much for poor Jeff. So he went out and purchased a 10-gallon container of industrial-strength pesticide. It all got a little out of control, and he more or less sprayed himself to death. In 1998, Jeff's widow remarried. She had moved to Florida to be closer to her own family soon after his death. One article by UPI that was posted on September 4th, 1992, stated that the coroner's toxicological report showed that Jeff died of heart disease that was caused by long-time cocaine use, as stated by coroner spokesman Bob Dombacher. The autopsy found traces of cocaine in Jeff's blood, along with benzoyl-ligonene, which is described as a metabolite or byproduct of cocaine. The coroner's report stated that the cause of death was determined to be occlusive coronary artery disease due to atherosclerosis due to the effects of cocaine. On Louder Sound, the story is a little different. Earlier in the day of August 5th, 1992, Steve Lukather had spoken to Jeff on the phone about Toto's upcoming tour. The conversation ended as it always did, with them telling each other, "I love you." Hours later, he got the call telling them that Jeff had been rushed to the hospital after suffering a seizure. In a state of panic, Lukather got lost while driving to the hospital. By the time I got there, Jeff was gone. A doctor took me to a room, and Jeff was lying there. And Jeff was lying there on a fucking slab. They left me in that room alone with him, and I freaked out. I was screaming. They had to give me smelling salts. Lou Cather has angrily refuted allegations that Jeff overdosed on cocaine. It was irresponsible journalism. You know, the guy had a wife and kids. He did not die from cocaine. I swear on all four of my children's lives. They found 1/100th of a microgram of cocaine in Jeff's blood. That's like 2 crystals on a fucking matchstick. That ain't gonna give somebody a heart attack. Believe me. The rest of us were doing 100 times more than that, and we all lived to tell the tale. Lou Cather stated that Jeff had a pre-existing heart condition, as stated before, but was also a heavy smoker. And to him, this is what Lou Cather believes led to the pesticide getting into Jeff's system. He's quoted as having said, he was probably smoking a cigarette or a joint. He didn't have gloves on. That's how the chemicals got into the skin. I think that, in the least, there were elements in Jeff's life that contributed to his death. A major contention would be smoking. Lou Cather said himself that Jeff was a heavy smoker. I don't understand why there's been this emphasis that the autopsy was wrong, or that the amount of cocaine was not enough. From all the articles I found, I never saw anyone accuse Jeff of being a cocaine addict, and there wasn't, to me, any hint of disrespect. Of course, there might have been tabloids that were highly disrespectful, but even still, why would the autopsy lie? That's the one question I have, which doesn't really make sense. Now, through all the articles, the coroner medical examiner's name was not mentioned. Once, not even once. Of course, Mr. Dombacher was a spokesperson for the coroner, but even still, whoever did the actual autopsy was never mentioned in any of the sources that I found. The pesticides that Jeff supposedly used and died from the allergic reaction from, whether it was from a seizure or a heart attack, once again, this seems to differ from source to source, but the name, there's never a name. The pesticides were never named. Neither their maybe generic or just scientific name in general. No one ever said if it was something like, I don't know, Biffin or Malpropion or whatever you want to call it. Nothing was ever claimed. Even in a 2000 article or 2002, nothing was named. So, was that true or not? I don't know. But I will say that I am a lot more apt to believe the autopsy's reports, and the consistently same answer that has come from the autopsy. It is kind of strange, though, that with the story of Jeff's death, that this emphasis on cocaine came about that somehow made him a bad person. And it's very strange that Jeff's friends and family were so against that having been his cause of death. It seems that the association of cocaine comes with a negative connotation. But one filthy habit or moment of leisure does not make up an entire person's personality or humanity. That's what I say to that. So whether or not Jeff Porcaro had died from the effects of cocaine, whether he ingested it recently or not, to me doesn't take away the fact that he was an outstanding musician. His death does not take away from the achievements he had in life. And I hope that maybe somebody will understand where I'm coming from, where Jeff's death is tragic, yes. It's incredibly sad that he left his family at such an unexpected and young age, with such young children, left behind. But the autopsy doesn't take away from who he was in his life, if you understand where I'm coming from. And for me personally, I have read this story and I think to myself that he might not have taken cocaine any time recently, even within the past 3 or 6 months before his death. But the fact of it is that coronary heart disease is something that takes years to build up. And to me, I mean, you could just say smoking alone could have caused that. And a family of heart disease doesn't help either. So, smoking plus heart disease plus at one point in his life, uh, I don't want to say necessarily strong drug use, but I mean, if the other members of Toto were doing cocaine a lot, I mean, I'm sure Jeff was too. And so that plus genetic, let's say, predisposals just kind of turned into this conglomerate of August 5th, 1992. But once again, this is not about trying to put somebody down. I think that we should celebrate Jeff's life and his achievements instead of focusing on how he died. To me, I don't think it would take away from him as a musician or even a father. And that's what I believe he should be remembered for, what he accomplished in his life as opposed to his way of death. And I hope that maybe you guys will feel the same way too.